On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we preview the game between Kansas and Oklahoma set for Saturday.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get any of your podcasts. You can also subscribe to us, find us on YouTube. And you can also hear me on Rock Chalk Sports Talk, Monday through Friday from 3 to 6 on KLWN in Lawrence. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're previewing Kansas taking on Oklahoma in Norman. The return trip after the first game was rather close, maybe a little too close for comfort in the case of Kansas. So going into this game, certainly very important for KU to try to keep pace and build their momentum after the Texas win, keep pace near the top. We'll get into that with our top storylines, scouting report over Oklahoma, and our matchups of the game. But first, this episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So our top storylines in the game, KU trying to stay at or near the top of the Big 12. Obviously, we'll wait and see what happens with some of the weekend action in the Big 12. Like in the case of Texas, they host West Virginia, which West Virginia has been like a sneaky good team on, some of the metric sites and maybe are starting to find something. Could they go into Austin and get a win? I don't know that I'm expecting that, but you have that. You have Kansas State at Texas Tech. I don't know, probably not one they trip in, but you never know. The TCU plays Baylor on Saturday, so there are some big results around you that certainly will impact the conference standings, not just dependent on what you do with the Oklahoma game, but from Kansas's standpoint, you enter into Saturday one game behind first place at 7-4. You're one game back of 8-3. And so hypothetically, if, the right results happen for you Saturday and you get a win, maybe you could move into a tie for first place. But at the very least, it is sticking around at least that, one game out spot where you're always within striking distance, where you're applying pressure to, maybe what the other teams are doing, and you're one win away because you want to stay within that striking distance. Like I don't know how much longer you can continue to bob between being 1 to 2 games back. So from that standpoint, that's certainly the top storyline, just KU trying to get another win and stay near the top of the Big 12 and stick around as one of the top title contenders in the conference. Number 2 is KU going for the sweep in this series. Maybe this is more about just a continuation of, what do we learn from the first game? How does that carry over? If Oklahoma plays like they did in the first game, but now they're at home, do they find a way to win the game? But for Kansas, it's very important to find a way to, if they can, sweep a series like this. When you look at all these other teams in the Big 12 in the top 6 who are like top 20 teams in the country, if hypothetically you were to say, well, we'll go 5-5, we'll split with all of them, then that means you really have to take care of business against the teams who are in those 7 through 10 spots, right? If you want to get to 12-6, that means you would have to go 7-1 against the teams in the 7 through 10 spots, meaning you would have to sweep 3 of the 4 and split with the 4th. Or to get to 13 wins in Big 12 play, you're going to have to sweep all 4 of them. You're 1-0 against all 4 of them. 2 of them you play at home, 2 of them you play on the road. Starting with this Oklahoma series, you play at Oklahoma and then at Oklahoma State on Tuesday. So you look at the math of winning the league. If that is the recipe, like you're going to have to sweep some of these teams, and Oklahoma is one of those that you really need to find a way to get a sweep. And at the very least, you need to get a sweep with one of the next 2, with either at Oklahoma or at Oklahoma State. So just get it done in this first game so that the Oklahoma State game would be the cherry on top and give you the better opportunity to try to sweep multiple of them. The next storyline is KU taking on Tanner Groves and the Groves brothers. I know this is, maybe at this point a bit of an exhausted storyline, and that every time they've played, this has been brought up that, oh, look what the Groves brothers did against Kansas in the first round of the NCAA tournament in 2021. It's going to get brought up again, so I'll just bring it up now. It is going to be a storyline. But I do think it's a little bit different this time because Groves really hurt KU last season too. But then in the matchup earlier this year was really the first time that he hasn't just like gone off. He didn't have like a great game in Norman last season, but the game in Allen Fieldhouse, the NCAA tournament game, he's really gone off against you and been a matchup problem. And in this game, or the earlier game in Allen Fieldhouse this year against Oklahoma, they kind of shut him down. And I think you attribute some of that to KU playing more of a small ball five, to where you're not going to have the advantages of being a stretch five. And KJ is probably still more athletic. I mean, he is, than Tanner Groves. So he's not going to be able to like outspeed him. So, you lose some of that advantage if you're Oklahoma, which is a good thing for Kansas in a game like this. But certainly whenever you get the Groves brothers against KU, that storyline will get and is right now getting brought up. The last one I got here is OU battling for their NCAA tournament lives. It can always be scary when you play a team on a Saturday that, I don't know, there's something about that like, oh, they're a bubble team that needs a win, and they're playing at home. And Oklahoma has been probably consistently like the least sold ticket venue for Big 12 games. But when they play KU, I would imagine those ticket sales are going to go up and that they'll have a pretty good crowd. I guess we'll kind of wait and see. So they're going to be rocking, and they need this win to make the NCAA tournament. It's kind of an uphill battle at this point in time. You look at, them being near the bottom of the conference, and I kind of think that when you look at just the total wins that you're going to have so that the record isn't 500, because I don't think they're going to let a 500 team into the NCAA tournament. Like, they're going to have to probably win, I don't know, 7 games in the Big 12 and maybe a game or 2 in the Big 12 tournament. And even that, like, I don't know. It might not be enough. So they really need to start racking up wins, which puts even more pressure on a game like this. And if they do win this game, they would have quite the resume, I guess, of wins. Obviously, everyone remembers the Alabama game, and that certainly sticks out when you beat one of the best teams in the country. You beat them by 24, which is your biggest win of the season by margin over UMKC. So, they're trying to stack those up. It's kind of an uphill battle at this point, but get them back on the map and get people talking about them again as being, near that bubble at the very least, or being one of those first 8 out or something like that, is winning a game like this over Kansas. And so they're going to be playing, I don't know, with a bit of desperation in that way, which makes them very, very dangerous. So you got to be careful here if you're KU headed into this game. And for OU, you're going to be playing with all sorts of passion, obviously playing a top-tier team. You almost beat them the first go-around. And if you can score a win this time, you keep your NCAA tournament hopes alive. I mean, I guess they're still technically alive, because even if you lose this game, like, what if you reeled 4 straight wins off, right? That can still happen. But this would be their best outcome to trying to get on that line. We're going to get on to our OU scouting report and what happened in the first matchup. But first, this episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from money line to point spreads to who's going to score a touchdown. I was doing some prop bets and going over them last night on the FanDuel app, and I did a couple different ones with like touchdowns or some of the yard ones. One that I liked is, go all out on rushing attack. So Isaiah Pacheco, you can get him an alt rush line at 70 plus rushing yards. It's like plus 300 odds. Parlay it with Isaiah Pacheco, 25 plus rushing yards. Maybe if KC gets up late, they're going to be running the football a good amount to try to eat the clock out. We saw that with Damian Williams, and then he busted the long one in the Super Bowl they won a few years ago in 2020. And maybe they have to run the ball a good amount to kind of keep that Eagles pass rush that's so good on their heels. I don't know. Could be something there. You can check that out at FanDuel Sportsbook. The app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no-sweat first bet to Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Oklahoma comes into this game as one of the bottom teams in the Big 12. They certainly are dangerous, though. Like, we've seen them beat top teams. We've seen them, beat Florida by 9 points. We've seen them beat West Virginia. We've seen them beat Alabama again by 24 points. Like, they've beaten some really good opponents so far this season. As far as that first matchup, they almost beat Kansas, and that would have been another nice notch in their belt. And that one would have been in Allen Fieldhouse. Alabama win probably better than Kansas just in terms of rankings, but if it would have been in Lawrence, like, that probably better than a home win versus Alabama. So KU ended up winning 79-75. It was 36-34 at halftime. Grant Sherfield hit like a buzzer beater at the half to kind of get some momentum back for them. And then Oklahoma took that 10-point lead with like 5 minutes to go. But KU, after having like a 13-minute stretch where they didn't hit a field goal, all of a sudden caught fire at the end of the game. They were able to get out in transition, and that's kind of one of the big keys here, which we'll get to in a second. But Grant Sherfield, 25 points in the first game for Oklahoma. He went 8 of 11 on 2-point shots, which a good amount of those were drives and layups. He also had a bunch of mid-range shots. He was kind of an assassin from there. He went 1 of 4 from 3. He also added 4 rebounds. Jalen Hill was pretty critical in the game, 9 points, but he was really good defensively. And then Tanner Groves, as I said, was kind of slowed down. He went just 3 of 10 from the floor. He had 10 points. Milos Uzan had 11 points, and Sam Godwin off the bench had 12 points for Oklahoma. For KU, Grady Dick struggled in that game, had just 8 points on 1 of 8 shooting. I believe he was face guarded in that game. So now you've learned a little bit more on how to deal with that. Maybe that will lead to more success this go around, and KU will obviously be prepared a little bit more for how to deal with the face guarding should Oklahoma choose to do that once again in this matchup. Jalen Wilson had 17 points, but he really struggled. He was just 3 of 12 from the floor. And it was really KJ Adams who won you the game. He had 22 points. He went 8 of 13 from the floor. He had 6 rebounds. Then you had 10 points off the bench from Zach Clemens, who was really good. So one of the few games that you've gotten good bench contributions, and you did basically from one guy. It was a bit of a slog. It was a struggle for KU, but they found their way to winning the game. Now, as far as Oklahoma, where they're sitting right now, this is a team who, they're solid at both offense and defense, but they're not like, elite top 40 in either unit right now. They shoot the ball really well from 2. They do a good job spacing the floor, and so they get cuts and easy layups to the rim. We saw that really hurt Kansas in the first matchup. They shoot well from 3. They don't take a ton. They're not an elite 3-point shooting team, but they shoot well. They do have turnover problems. Sometimes they can look for the very, very best shot, and it leads to them getting an open layup. Other times they try to squeeze one in to try to get that best shot, and it leads to a turnover. They don't go for offensive rebounds. Like, they don't really get them, but it's more of a strategy thing because they play at a very slow tempo. They're 303rd in the country in adjusted tempo. They're going to send guys back, and they try to limit you in transition. That's basically what they do because they don't want you to beat them in those transition buckets. And going back to the Kansas side of things, Kansas can be really good when they get in transition. We saw them break open the game against Oklahoma and have that comeback by getting out in transition. But for a majority of the game, they weren't able to get out in transition, and it really hurt them offensively. A 13-minute spell where they only had, or they didn't make a field goal. It was only free throws, which the game also came to a grinding halt, and lots of free throws for both teams in that second half. Now, defensively, Oklahoma is really good at limiting threes. They chase you off the 3-point line. They contest the 3-point line. It is a strategy by them. They do a very good job of doing that. They're a pretty good defensive rebounding team, pretty good rim protection, but not great at either. They don't get a lot of steals and turnovers. KU had times where they had some turnover issues in that game, but overall ended out okay for the game. And I think that's a very big positive for KU. Like, so most of their losses have come in games where they've had high turnover numbers. This is the type of game that if you have high turnover numbers, it's because you messed up. Like, they're not a team that's really their forte. So it shouldn't be a high turnover game, but I guess you never really know because sometimes, like I said, that stuff is very much just kind of self-inflicted. As far as the lineup they throw out there, Uzan is kind of the one with Grant Sherfield, the 2, but they're both kind of handle the ball. Sherfield is the sharpshooter, looking like a possible first 12 pick, if not for sure in the second team with the way he can score it. Jalen Hill on the wing. He'll play kind of the 3-4, whatever they need. You'll see Jacob Groves, CJ Nolan on the wing. And then you'll see some Sam Godwin as the backup 5 who really hurt KU. I think he was a former walk-on. Tanner Groves, though, will be the starter. He's kind of the big name for them. It's pretty much a switchable small ball lineup 1 through 4, but then they play the traditional center. But with Groves at 6'10", he's able to really stretch out the floor. And so with Groves, you have one of the better centers in the Big 12. With Grant Sherfield, you have one of the best scorers in the Big 12. And with Jalen Hill, you have one of the best defenders in the Big 12. Those are probably the 3 biggest players to watch on the Sooners coming into matchup number 2 with Oklahoma. Let's finish things up with our matchups of the game here with Locked On Jayhawks. So Kansas taking on Oklahoma on Saturday. That one will tip off at noon Central Time, which means you can hear pregame on KLWN and 105.9 KISS radio stations here in Lawrence starting at 10:30 with tip-off at noon. Matchup number 1 of the game is just how much can Kansas get out in transition. Just talked about this, but Kansas was really limited in transition in that first game, and it really led to an absolute slog ball till those final minutes of the game where they were able to kind of figure it out, I guess. But Kansas went just 18 of 48 from 2-point range. That's 37.5%. They went just 4 of 11 from 3. They just kind of grinded their way to the win. They had 12 offensive rebounds. They only had 6 turnovers. Again, going back to the fact that OU doesn't force a ton of turnovers. And they made 31 free throws. Like, that's how they won the game. But it wasn't a pretty game. And that it's a little better that you get out a little bit more in transition in this game. That would certainly be helpful to making it a more open game and a favorable game to KU's way. Matchup number 2, Grady Dick getting face guarded, question mark. Is Oklahoma going to do the same thing they did in game 1? It worked well enough. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So maybe you expect them to do it. If they don't do it, I guess it's, what you do normally. But I expect a better, better way of figuring it out for Kansas now that they saw it in the first game. Grady Dick will know better what to do. Because it's one thing when Ochai Agbaji got face guarded last year. Like, he's a senior. He's been through the rigors and more experienced player. With Grady still going through, your freshman season and everything. So how can KU take advantage of that? In the last game, they really used it with those middle ball screens, and it was DeJuan and KJ, and that's how KJ ended up with 22 points. They basically made it a 2-person game by spreading out the floor. I'd imagine you're going to see more of that, but OU is probably going to counter that somehow. So that kind of chess match between the two coaches, Bill Self and Porter Moser, is going to be really interesting. And how does KU deal with it? Do they use Grady Dick as decoy? Do they find ways to still get Grady, going where because he's face guarded, now he can back cut the guy and he can get some easy layups to the rim? That'll be a super interesting find for me in what happens with this game. KJ Adams versus Tanner Groves, part 2. Talked about how Tanner Groves had just 10 points in the game. He went just 3 of 10 from the floor. Meanwhile, KJ Adams had the 22-point outing with 6 rebounds, 2 blocks, and a steal. He was excellent. KJ was the MVP of the game, and KJ did a really good job defending him because he was able to get out in space, and you didn't have the worry of, oh, no, we have a big lumbering center. Tanner Groves is just going to be able to either shoot a 3 over him, or if he gets contested too much, he'll just drive him and finish at the bucket. KJ's faster than him. He's just as strong as him, and he's mobile to get out on the 3 on him. So it really limited that for Oklahoma. We'll see if that continues here in game 2, or if Tanner Groves figures out something, or maybe goes to more post-up work in a game like this. I guess we'll wait and see. The battle of the Jalens. Jalen Hill guarding Jalen Wilson. So Jalen Hill is one of the best defenders in the Big 12. He's a really good wing defender, about 6'6", 6'7" for Oklahoma, and he'll really get into you. And he really, it wasn't always him on Jalen Wilson, but it was a lot of him on Jalen Wilson, who went 3 of 12. Again, you look at the stat sheet, Jalen Wilson had 17 points. But he just went 3 of 12. Not very efficient game. A big reason why is Jalen Hill. Can KU free up Jalen Wilson a little bit more? Can Jalen Wilson find a way to have a more efficient game on one of the better defenders in the Big 12? Or if Jalen Hill wins that matchup again, that's a huge boon for Oklahoma. I think whoever guards Grant Sherfield for Kansas is certainly going to be a very important matchup. 25 points in the first outing for OU. He's been one of the best scorers in the Big 12 so far this season. He can really hit tough shots, does well in the mid-range. I don't know if it will be Grady Dick, if it will be DeJuan Harris or Kevin McCullough. We saw some DeJuan Harris on him last game. We saw a lot of Kevin McCullough on him last game. I would lean toward you'd expect, I guess, Kevin McCullough to be on him. But Maybe not. I mean, he's 6'2", so maybe DeJuan Harris would be the guy that draws a majority of the matchup. We do know KU switches a lot, so it will be kind of the responsibility of a little bit of everyone at different points in time. But whoever is guarding him on the specific possession, it's going to be critical to close out as much as you can, make him take tough shots, and you just hope that day he isn't really making them all, because he can really get hot in a hurry. So just don't let him really have a takeover game. And then the last one I have here is shooting inside. This goes for both teams. KU had its second lowest 2-point offensive game in the first meeting with Oklahoma. It was their second lowest of the year. The only one lower was Tennessee. They have to find a way to get more open looks on the interior. Oklahoma's got a pretty good 2-point defense, but it's not an elite defense. KU just missed a lot of bunnies. Like they missed a lot of layups. Oklahoma hit some tough layups. That was part of the first game that could correct itself in the second game. But for Kansas, you still got to finish those shots in a game like this. And we know this Kansas team isn't one that's going to get super easy buckets around the rim consistently. We did see them get a bunch of cuts on Texas to lead to some of those easy shots. Probably won't be as easy against Oklahoma, but they have to shoot better from two than they did in the first game. And then on the other side, Oklahoma had a great 2-point shooting game against Kansas. It was the worst 2-point defense game of the season for Kansas this year. So Oklahoma dominated inside two. Kansas struggled inside two, yet Kansas found a way to win somehow. That's not a good recipe for winning on the road. That's not a good recipe for continuing to win games. And, they were maybe had some Allen Fieldhouse magic to get them through that game. You don't have that in this game down in Norman. So you have to do a better job of limiting the interior. And because of the fact that Tanner Groves pulls out the center with KJ Adams, you don't really have that help fender as the center on the interior to help erase shots, to help block shots. Not that, KJ is this Jeff Withey type force inside, but it basically spaces the floor well, where it allows for guys to get driving lanes to the rim, or it allows for guys to be one-on-one on their way to the rim. And so if you as an individual defender don't do a good enough job of preventing a dribble drive to the rim, you're going to get smoked for it. And you have to do a good job of being aware and watching back cuts off the ball. They do that a lot, and they get easy layups off it. You have to do a better job this game. If the 2-point discrepancies that we saw in game one happen in game two, Oklahoma's going to win this game. If KU can tighten it up a little bit or even win that, then I think you feel good about where KU is at. That's going to do it for this episode, though, of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget, you can subscribe to the show wherever you get any of your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube. You can hit me up with any questions or give me a follow at DJohnsonRadio on Twitter. And we'll be back on Monday to recap whatever happens in the Oklahoma game, and then Tuesday to preview the KU Oklahoma State game. If you have anything you'd like for the show to talk about, hit us up. Have a good rest of your day. See you next time. Locked On Jayhawks.